Guys, we're here for the presentation of the Discipleship Plan 2023 Spring for the Discipleship class. My name is Andrew Souza, and this is the final presentation. Alright, so let's get right into it. Let's not waste any time. To begin with, the introduction. The Discipleship Plan has seven general topics, and each one of these parts is a seven-part presentation. Each one of these parts regards itself with the matter of the topic being described by the part. So the first one is definitions, second one is reasons for discipleship, the third one is stages of discipleship, fourth one is leader training, guidelines, suggestions, and requirements, the fifth one is suggested activities to encourage discipleship, the sixth one spiritual versus chronological maturity differences within the discipleship process, and the seventh one is general suggestions from the congregation. So I'll get deeper into each one of those as we go by, but as of right now, that's all we get to know. Alright, so let's start with definitions. This is a part where we go to some key definitions which I find very important for the discipleship program. First one is identity, and here describe it as who God says I am. And the examples I give is Exodus 3:4, when Moses is called. He says he has a lot of speech impediment and that he's not capable, but God says he's capable. And then he keeps on complaining to God because he thinks he knows who he is. But God says, who created man? I created man, so I tell you who you are. And that's a good example. The second one is the call of Gideon. And he says, the angel says he's a mighty warrior, but he says, no, 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 no. I am the smallest one of the smallest clan of the tribe of Benjamin. And so, then again, God is giving him who he is, and that ends up being who he actually is. And then the other examples are David, John the Baptist is referenced here in three different references, Malachi, Luke 1:15-17, Isaiah 43, and Luke 1:76-78. Those are all references to John the Baptist and what God said he would be, and what prophecy, which came from God, said that John would be, and what he ended up being, exactly what God said. And then the last ones are about Jesus. All right. Mission. Obeying what God tells me to do as an act of living sacrificial worship. This is very important to me because the way I describe this here, the reason for that is we have the Great Commission, obviously, which is going to be described in purpose, but we also have our individual mission. And the reason I didn't put the Great Commission as the mission is because when the purpose of our individual mission is to share the gospel and make disciples, then this leads this organically leads to an organic progression to the idea that my mission, my individual mission, has as a final purpose to fulfill the greater mission. Every single individual calling, every single individual mission on earth has as its final destination to share the gospel, make disciples, and glorify God. So this is the purpose. That's why the purpose is what it is, and that's why the mission is what it is. And the purpose, as I said before, is the Great Commission. The verse I used for the mission was Romans 12:1, where he says, offer yourselves as living sacrifices to God. And I personally thought that was a very inspirational verse for that. And John 4:23 is, if I am not mistaken, is like whoever comes to me. No, that's the one of the woman in the well. Yeah, it's the woman in the well, and he's telling the woman in the well that worshippers of God should worship him and are going to worship him in spirit and in truth. I did not put the reference for the Great Commission here, but it's because I assume that the leaderboard of the church already knows Matthew 28, and I already knows it is Matthew 28, so that's the reason I didn't put that there. I thought it was more important to reference the in truth and spirit part because it's not as well known. All right, the fourth definition is gospel. Salvation and transformation implemented by the way of living shown by the teachings and actions of God's salvation plan, Jesus, the Messiah. And then, that's pretty straightforward. The references are John 3:16, Acts 2:14-47. This John 3:16, everybody knows. Acts 2:14-47 is the passage where Peter, right after the day of Pentecost, stands in front of everybody and tells a very resumed overview of the whole story of the Gospels to the Jews present there. So I thought it was a good Bible citation to have there. And then the last one is disciple, one who follows in the steps of Jesus by imitating both his teachings and his actions in their lifestyle. The reason I put this here is because Jesus says, whoever wants to follow me must bear his cross daily and follow me, right? Deny himself. And he also says that he who loves Jesus, he who is a true disciple, is the one that obeys his actions. So that's why I put disciple here. And that also had something to do with the book by Brandon Guyton, but because I didn't take anything directly from there, I didn't put a citation. All right, part two, the reasons for discipleship, the whys of discipleship. So the first why, and I'm just gonna cruise through this one, because it's pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna read the quotes, and many times in the church we think, why should we focus so much on discipleship? That's such a foreign concept to some people. We think, well, the pastor's preaching, so he's discipling us. We have Bible school or small groups, but discipleship is much more than that. And it's much more important than a secondary aspect of the church. The reason for this is, first one, the church is called to reach the world for Jesus, one person at a time. In other words, every Christian is commanded to participate in the mission to make disciples. Discipleship is a key part of Christianity, and they said this in the discipleship manual book by the Real Life Ministries Church. And then the second reason is Jesus came to them and said, and that's just a description of the Great Commission. The Great Commission actively tells us to be making disciples. It's a key part of the Great Commission to make disciples, and we often overlook that. So that's another reason why discipleship is super important. It's a command that Jesus gave us directly. And then the third one, discipleship was an active part of Jesus' ministry on earth. Jesus didn't come to earth just to save us, he came to make disciples. In John 17:49, as said by the Putman book, Jesus says his work is completed. He says, this work now comes into completion there before he had died. Why? Because part of his work was also to make disciples. He didn't just come to save us, but to show us a new way of living. A new way of living. And that's important. That's very important. He didn't just come to save us, he also came to show us the way to live. He is the consummation of the law and the prophets, and the law and the prophets tell the people of Israel how to relate to God, how to live their lives. In other words, the law and the prophets are meant to disciple people in what God desires for them and how they should live according to God. And Jesus came to impersonate that. So a key part of his ministry was discipleship. Anyways, let's go forward. Here are the stages of spiritual maturity. This is a rather longer part, but I'm gonna, you know, explain each one in a resumed version. Okay, so we start with the spiritually dead. Everybody that is not a believer is spiritually dead. They do not have Jesus, they're not alive. Jesus is where their life begins spiritually. One may argue that if somebody is, a witch or a wizard, or works with, I don't know, sorcery, they might be spiritually active in some way. But when I say spiritually alive or spiritually dead, what I mean is that the concept here is that anybody that is involved with spiritual forces in any way, besides light, besides the way of light, besides the way of justice and righteousness, which is Jesus, is not spiritually alive. They're spiritually dead. They might be spiritually mistaken, but they're not spiritually alive. All right, the first definition is dead. This person is usually rebellious, hardened, sometimes curious and willing to learn. Depends on the person, depends on the situation. But in general, they just don't know Jesus, and they need an invitation to meet Jesus. And some phrases they might say is like, I don't like the church, Christ is fake, it has never worked for me, it's all a man-made, concept. And so these are important. These phrases are important so you can hear what people are saying, pay attention to the sheep that you're pasturing, and see what level of discipleship they are. You know, if they are ready to go to receive more responsibility, if they're still in need of more milk, or if they can eat meat, as Paul says it, right? If they're mature enough to eat milk, to eat meat instead of just drinking milk. That's an important part too. The needs are also important because the needs help you know what one's like. The fact that the needs are mentioned here in the chart helps you know what one needs, like what are the necessities of a disciple, and that's a very, very important topic. All right. The second stage is infant. An infant usually confused, ignorant, dependent, very dependent on a spiritual parent, much like a baby is dependent on a father and a mother. A newborn baby is not just going to go walking around and cooking for himself. He needs to be taken care of. The behavior usually tends to be legalistic. They try to find out what's going on. They're kind of confused. When it comes to church things, they just got there. They just been saved. They quite don't know what's going on yet. But um, that doesn't necessarily mean that, it's bad or wrong. It just means that they're learning. They need attention, protection, and explanations, as a regular infant would. And they might say things like, I've been hurt, so now it's just God and me for now. And my church is in a cabin in the woods, as it's written in the manual for discipleship. This shows that they are spiritually alive, but they don't have a very deep sense of maturity. The third one is a child. The child is self-centered, prideful, interdependent. They know enough to get themselves around, but they end up thinking they know more than what they actually know, and they want to show that they know. So they might mimic the behaviors of mature parent, disciples, or other people just to be accepted and to be praised. And this is right. It's normal. Children want to be looked at. They want to be, cared for. They want the attention on them. That happens to every single child about age what maybe from 4 to 11, and even later. And it's important. It's a part of the process, and it's not all bad because here they know more than they did when they were infants. But they usually might display behaviors that they complain a lot about things. They might whine, be disappointed at others, put expectations on others' behavior super high, and be disappointed that they don't meet those expectations. Be legalistic in the point that because they know a little more about the Bible, they might say, well, but in Leviticus it says that, I don't know, men shouldn't have tattoos, and so has a tattoo. Isn't he a hypocrite? Or they might say, my church was so nice when it was small, and now that it's getting more people, I don't like it. The pastor barely sees me. They need a spiritual family, practical and theoretical teachings, and deeper biblical topics. They need more, you know, solid food so they can like eat, digest, and grow. And then the fourth one is the youth, the young adult. They're more grown, more mature than the child. They're service oriented. They're not self centered. They're more centered and focused on helping others. They're more zealous for God's word. They have a desire to serve. They usually display pride if they gain a convert. Some of the aspects of childhood still remain, and they might feel very defeated if they fail. They need opportunities to serve. They need people to make them to help them have accountability, and they need responsibility. They need responsibility and opportunities to grow, and they need to be encouraged in their growth. This is a very crucial moment. And they might say things like, "How can I serve other people? I see that this ministry is needing help. How can I help you guys? What do you need me to do?" Here they start shifting their minds from, you know, me to others. And that's a very, very important part of the discipleship process. And the last one is the parent. The reason it's parent instead of adult is because the word parent implies a child. And for someone to be spiritually mature enough to reach the parent level, they should by then be perfectly capable of making disciples because they are mature enough now. They're independent and dependable. They're strategic. They're self-feeding. They think in terms of group needs. They're not individual anymore, and they give glory to God in all that they do, all that God does through them. If they boast about what God's doing. They don't boast about themselves. They let others compliment them and not themselves. What they do in honor of God, and they have joy um, in the service. They need relationships with other co-laborers. They need a church family and encouragement. Because right here, once your disciple becomes a parent disciple, he's not your student anymore. You're both co-disciples, co-followers of Jesus. And then the last one is that they might say things like, pray for me, I'm sharing the gospel with my friend, or please pray that I will have wisdom to share the gospel with my family, or I really am thankful because the church is growing so much. I see so many new faces. That's so good. Blessed be the Lord. And these are the five spiritual stages of maturity that I put here. And yeah, let's go to the next one. Well, leader training, suggestions, and requirements. All right, so for this one, it's a longer one, but I will resume it for you guys so you don't have to you know have me go through everything that's listed here. But the point here is this. Once a disciple starts growing in maturity, quite often that disciple might display the desire to be a leader, to start leading a group, maybe to, start making disciples of his own, and that's perfect. And any person can have followers and can be a leader to other people at any stage of the discipleship process, any stage after, spiritually dead. Because once they come to know Jesus, from that point on, they're perfectly capable of making disciples and of leading other people. But the point is that we're not just talking about leading in the sense of like, yeah, someone in my school has saw Jesus in my life and I've been helping him. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is leading a small group representing the church as an organization. And this is a process that should be very carefully taken care of because people might have all sorts of different motives for doing this and they might not be ready because it's different. It's very different. And then this is what this section is about. It's about leader training, leader suggestions, and requirements that one should have before reaching the leader status, before making sure that he or she is ready to lead a group of his or her own. So the process starts with a person showing the desire, and then this desire should be met with prayer and consensus from the elders and supervisors before any action can be taken. If the prayer and consensus is yes, the answer is yes for those, then this person, the disciple, should be submitted through a process of leader training and preparation so that they can, be prepared and ready to lead the group. I'll read some of them to you, but I won't go through all of them because there are quite a lot of them. In fact, maybe I should just read them and then, you make what you will of those. But yeah, there are only 8 of them. I thought there would be more. All right. A. Leaders should be capable of practicing discipleship and servant leadership at home. One needs to possess a constant and accurate overall knowledge of the salvation plan described within the Bible. In this one, I want to make a comment. Nobody needs to know the Bible cover to cover to be a disciple, to be a leader, to be a leader. But given that someone knows how to read, which I suppose is most people in Western culture, which we find ourselves in, and given that somebody loves Jesus and Bibles are available everywhere, if you have time to watch a TV show, if you have time to like, go work out or, go do other things that you like, it's quite possible that you could be using that time to read the Bible. And if you can read the Bible and study the Bible, if you're capable and you have the opportunity, then you should be doing it. Because you can't be a leader if you're not searching to grow yourself. Anyways. C. It is also necessary to be humble, constant in prayer, willing to serve, and willing to grow. One should also live in submission in their relationship with Jesus. Pride precedes the downfall, and so humility is essential. Okay, that one speaks for itself. I don't need to explain. D. A future leader needs to strive to imitate Christ in their lifestyle, in and out of church. This is very important because if you just follow Jesus in church, whatever motives lead you to do that, that's not what Christianity is about. Church is not supposed to be a little club. You're supposed to take the light of Jesus and then spread it to the world wherever you go. And if you want to be a leader, that's much more so. All right, next one. E. Future leaders should be taught to know the people they are discipling and create an environment for growth. Very important. You got to know who you're leading. F. Future leaders need to know what their role is, as well as what God's role is, and also what the disciples' role is. That's very important so that there will be balance. If the leader doesn't know the roles and what each one of them are supposed to be doing, the leader might do too much. And by doing too much, not giving the disciple an opportunity to act, to serve, and to grow. The leader might also do too little, undermining their responsibility towards the disciple and towards God. Because the leader needs to care. He can't just not do anything and expect the disciples to know everything. The key here is to have a balance in what you need to do. You know what space you need to give the disciple, and you know the things that you can't do and that you shouldn't do, and you should let God act on. And not that God doesn't act on the other things, but it's important to know the balance because sometimes the leader might try to do everything, and quite often this doesn't work. G. Future leaders should spend some time serving in the church and in the community before they can go and lead someone. The Bible says, and John 3:1-5 is here, that if you want to be the leader, you should be the servant, the lowest one, the servant of all. And if you cannot serve in the community and in the church, then you're not ready to lead. A leader should be a servant first and then a leader after. Future leaders should accompany present leaders in their routine as much as possible so they can learn from experience rather than just theory. This point right here is very, very important. Many cases it's not possible, as I said right there, because we have all sorts of different reasons. But if possible, it is very, very beneficial for leaders to, while they are in training, go with already trained leaders and see their schedules, see how it is, get some field experience before they can go and do it themselves, because this helps. It's like doing an internship. Anyways, next one. Part 5, activities that encourage discipleship. Some activities that you could do in a small group or, in some discipling situations as a leader is inviting people to pray, for God to give them opportunities to share the gospel, inviting people to be a Christ imitating role model, not only at home, but also outside, inviting everyone to read the Bible and learn more about Scripture so they can be better equipped to live the Christian life and help others to do it as well. Inviting all mothers and fathers to intentionally disciple their children, group Bible readings and storytelling, and inviting people to serve at church and in their local community. These are all just some examples of activities. I'm sure every number of activities is possible and perfectly acceptable, but these are just some, you know, examples. Part 6, spiritual versus chronological age and maturity. This part is important. The point of this part is this. The stage, there is a problem in church because in church you have people of all different ages and backgrounds and spiritual levels, spiritual maturity levels. This part is essentially a disclaimer. It's a disclaimer because the stages presented in part 3, the spiritual stages, they're all based on spiritual maturity, which has nothing to do with chronological age. The problem with this is because you could have a 14-year-old that's super mature in the faith and a 70-year-old who's like been in church for years and years and has the maturity level of a child. This proposes a problem. Are you going to separate people by their maturity level in the spirit, or are you going to separate them by chronological age? But even though it might seem more logical to put them in the maturity by maturity levels, first of all, that can sometimes be very, very uncomfortable and disorienting for people to be told, no, you cannot go to this group because you're immature enough in the spirit. And also, not that we care necessarily about what people think, but sometimes this can be misused and it's overall just not a great way to divide people. Now, when it comes to age, there's some topics that even if a 14-year-old is super mature spiritually, he might not be ready to know about or to hear about, and he might not even understand. You can't just have a group of like 7, 10, 15-year-olds hearing about marriage problems, retirement problems, um, or some other, more deep issues that you'd be perfectly acceptable to talk about in a mature grown-ups group. So the proposal here is that you divide the people by their chronological age, and obviously this is gonna, propose this is gonna lead to like a diversity in maturity, spiritual maturity, but that's a good thing because it's better for a group to have several different levels of spiritual maturity than for it to be like just divided by spiritual maturity. And the reason for this concept that I chose to put here in part 6 is the fact that for a leader, if the leader is leading all all his um l- all his people in the small group, he's leading only infants, spiritual infants. This could be a problem. This could be overwhelming. Um, for him, for them, he would have to spend an extra amount of time paying attention to all of their needs. But now, if the group has a, you know, spiritual parent or a spiritual young adult, spiritual child, each one can help each other, and it's an opportunity for the disciples to grow, for the leader to be helped, and to grow himself. And even the less mature disciples, they get opportunities to learn from people that were they're still, in the discipleship process, but that are not leaders yet, and it gives an opportunity for the more mature disciples to help the lesser ones. And This makes a diverse community, and I think this is essential. But anyways, that was just a disclaimer. And the last part, part seven, the general suggestions. I only put two of them because those are the only ones that really bothered me, and I thought it was necessary to write down. And I'll just go get right into them so I don't waste any more time. Part seven. You'd be beneficial for a church as a congregation to understand that the church is not the organization or the building. The church is a community that professes their faith in Jesus Christ, and it should be treated as such. This is from the Bonhoeffer biography. Once the church community is centered around Jesus, discipleship is more easily attained, as it is described by Brandon Guyton in his book, Discipleship Making Culture. I believe in this truly. It is necessary for the church to see itself as a Christ-centered community. When the church starts thinking of itself as an organization, as a business, rather than an organic group, an organic group of people centered in Jesus, things start getting dry cold. It's more about the numbers. It's more about how many people are there. It's more about, this and this and that, and the best lights and the best music. And it's less about, how many disciple, like, who are we discipling? Or are we really discipling these people? How many of this multitude of people that are coming to our service are really being discipled? How many of them are actually coming to know Jesus? How many of them are independent enough to have their own discipleship of God, not depending on, a spiritual parent to be always checking on them to make sure they're like doing good. These things are important. I think like the community aspects help the church grow much better than all the money we pour into it by via the business model. Because the business model is very good for fundraising, it's very good for events, but it's quite often not good to produce organic growth. Anyways, second part. I think it would be important for a congregation as a whole to understand the importance of discipleship and how a Christ centered life is not complete without it, as shown by the Wise of Discipleship slide at the beginning of this presentation. This is a very good topic, me included. Before I went through this class, I did not know the value of discipleship and the importance of this subject in the biblical scriptures, in the gospel, in the Great Commission, in Jesus' main mission. I did not realize that, and I think many people in the church, like me, don't realize this, and this is what causing a great amount of decay in our church communities. It's like the church is dying, and the reason it's dying is because it's not making disciples. It's not about how many people go to your church, it's about discipling. It's about leading them towards a life with Jesus. It's not about getting them to be regular members in your church, it's about getting them to be regular members in their time with God. It's about getting them to know God, to know who He is, to know what He says about them, and to know what their role is among their community, the world, and their relationship with God. And I think discipleship is great and amazing and essential for church growth and church life. And without it, there is a key component that's missing. Anyways, that's the end of the presentation. Here are the references. We have the Disciple Making Culture by Brian Gandon, the real life real life church ministries. I think that's the name. Anyways, that's the church that wrote the discipleship training manual, and we also have the Ruth Andrew Bonhoeffer as a youth worker book, which is the biography of John Heffer. Very good book about discipleship and youth work, and all of those helped formulate this whole project, including the Bible. The Bible also helped a lot. Obviously, I had a lot of citations from the biblical scriptures, but the thing is that in Chicago style, it's not necessary to cite the Bible in the total references. At least that's what I read online, and I hope it is correct. That's why I didn't put it there. But yeah, the Bible and these three books were the main sources of information for this whole project. So, anyways, that's the end. Thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me finish this.